Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Brodies event to celebrate International Women's Day 2024. My name's Christine O'Neill and I am the chair of Brodies. As in all things, we like to think here at Brodies that we are ahead of the game, so we are hosting this event 2 days ahead of the official International Women's Day 2024, which falls on Friday the 8th of March. I'd like to welcome everyone who is joining today. The format for this event is slightly unusual in that we're broadcasting both to an audience of Brodies colleagues and to an audience of clients and friends of the firm who are tuning in. We even have some watch parties in our offices with colleagues gathered to watch the event together. I'm grateful to the Chancellor of the Exchequer for giving away the big secrets of the budget last night so that you don't have alternative entertainment calling on your attention this afternoon. I'm going to be joined on this webinar by 3 panellists to whom you'll be introduced in a moment. And I just want to say that we're very grateful to them for giving up their time for the event. In terms of format, I'm going to monopolise them for the first part of the session by putting questions to them that relate to this year's International Women's Day theme. There will then be an opportunity for you as participants in the session to ask questions, and that's where the Q&A function comes in. So please use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform to send your questions to me, and I will endeavour to ask them of our panellists. As you may know, the theme of International Women's Day 2024 is Inspire Inclusion, and our panellists are going to talk about what that theme means for them. But in essence, it's a theme about how we communicate to others the value of inclusion, and specifically women's inclusion, and how when we do that, we can inspire others to recognise that value and feel included themselves. So on to our panel, and ordinarily at an event like this, I would introduce our panellists to you, but in the spirit of empowerment, the panellists are going to introduce themselves and say what they want to say about themselves first, if we begin with Susan.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for having me. So I'm Susan Campbell. I work at the Scottish National Investment Bank, which is Scotland's development bank and an impact investor. And at the bank, we invest commercially in pursuit of 3 missions, which is net zero, place and innovation. I've been working at the bank for over 3 years now in an investment role, working in investments in the place mission. I've actually just changed role to work on more of our kind of longer term market creation work that we're calling it. So it's looking at more innovative models and new ways of thinking and collaborating with others to address the place mission. And as part of that, I've also taken on a role looking at equalities for the bank. As an investor, as an employer, and as a procurer, we look at equalities across all those aspects. So delighted to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Rupa?
Thanks, Christine. I'm Rupa Mooker. I started off my career in the legal profession, so I'm an employment lawyer by background. I trained at a Scottish independent law firm and did all the usual kind of progression through all the various stages. And I was at senior associate stage. 2017, I think, I sort of had a little bit of an epiphany and decided I wanted a bit of a career change. So I then became the Director of People and Development at the firm that I worked at. And at that stage, although I'd always had an interest in EDI matters, through my role and because I was covering all things HR, DEI, I developed a bit more of a passion and interest at that stage. I also developed a greater interest in mental health and wellbeing within the legal profession, so I've been doing a bit of work around that. And also I'm very passionate about increasing representation from ethnically diverse backgrounds into the legal profession, as well as improving socio-economic diversity. I'm a member of the Law Society's Equality and Diversity Committee. I sit on the Scotland National Advisory Committee for Action for Children, which is a children's charity, and sort of out with work, although I say out with work, but it is actually work as well. I'm a regular contributor on BBC Scotland on a number of issues in respect of employment law, HR, diversity, inclusion, and randomly I'm also a radio presenter and an events host, just to keep it all a bit fun. So delighted to be here today.
And we'll not ask you what you do in your spare time, Rupa. Katherine.
Thanks, Christine. My name is Katherine Planas, and I am the Director of Development for the Edinburgh International Festival. You might know about us, you might not. Every August, we bring a hand-picked program of the finest performers across dance and opera and theater and music from all around the world to Edinburgh for our August festival. But throughout the year, we also create meaningful connections to the arts for young people and communities across Edinburgh. And ultimately, our vision is that through the performing arts, we can create the deepest possible experience for the broadest possible audience to the highest quality of art from all around the world.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Thank you again to all of our panelists. I hope the audience will agree this is shaping up already to be a fascinating session. Susan, my first question is for you, and you talked in your introduction about how in your role at the Scottish National Investment Bank, you've been involved in its place mission, which, as I understand it, uses new kinds of investment models with the aim of reducing what might be described as place-based inequalities. Could you say a little bit more about what that means? What are place-based inequalities? Who experiences them, and why are they particularly relevant in the context of the International Women's Day theme?
Thanks, Christine. So, yeah, I mean, first to say that the bank's place mission, as you say, it's about addressing place-based inequality. That's the kind of grand challenge that we've been set up to address through that mission. And essentially that's about creating places where everyone thrives. So that could be through investment in physical assets, physical regeneration, building new homes, or it might be more about investing in communities, so organisations that provide services to communities. So a very holistic kind of approach to place. And I mean, the reason that that's important today, I think, is that it's recognising that there's huge disparities in Scotland between places and within places. So, 1 in 5 people in Scotland live in relative poverty, including children. And even when you look at a relatively wealthy city like Edinburgh, 22% of Edinburgh's children are living in poverty and relative poverty. So you can see that, those stark differences. And in terms of why that matters today for a conversation about inclusion, well, poverty, socioeconomic disadvantage is an absolutely huge barrier to inclusion, and particularly when you look through that place lens. So, we know through research over the decades that where you live, so your house, your neighbourhood, the quality of that home and neighbourhood and your access to services, it's got a huge impact on your life chances, in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of employment. There's just the statistic that people living in the most deprived parts of Scotland spend about 30% of their lives in poor health, compared to about 15% if you live in the least deprived parts of Scotland. So that's a huge impact on people's potential and ability to realise that potential. And I think on International Women's Day as well, it's important to talk about, well, the gender lens on that. So, we treat socioeconomic disadvantage at the bank as a 10th protected characteristic. We view it in that way. And we know that there's a gender lens to that as well, and intersectionality between characteristics. So, more women will experience poverty, primarily due to unpaid caring responsibilities, the impacts on work, the impacts on earning potential, the impacts on pensions. So all of that is kind of the context as to why, we at the bank see place-based inequality as something important to talk about on a day like today. Obviously, the theme today is about action, so it's about inspiring action, not just talk about inclusion. So what does this actually mean, that we can do in practice? So, from the bank's lens as an impact investor, the biggest impact we can have on inequality is through how we use our capital. So what we invest in. So, for example, if we invest in more affordable homes, we know that's got an impact on reducing inequality. But also through all of our investments, how can we encourage all of our investees, right from the first time we meet a potential investee, to think about all aspects of equality through their business and their workforces and their practices. We put non-financial as well, financial covenants into our investment agreements. So, adherence to fair work principles, for example. And then also, how can we work with our investees to create communities of learning and share best practice? So it's about how we as a bank can also create that ripple effect out in communities, build that momentum and work with others, which I think is the theme of today, about how we all come together to inspire that action.
So thank you for taking up the cudgels of action, because I'm going to take that theme up with Rupa to the theme this year of Inspire Inclusion is about recognising unique perspectives, the contributions of women from all walks of life, including marginalised communities of the sort that Susan's described and others. But we are all about action. So I don't know if you have anything you could say, Rupa, around strategies and techniques that can be used to allow people, women, to be heard more effectively and perspectives to be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Susan's already sort of set the tone for that. The hashtag is hashtag Inspire Inclusion this year. It's a really good one. It invites us to consider intersectionality in the context of International Women's Day. I think that's so important. I've seen a lot more online recently. There's a lot going on in the world, obviously, and traditional approaches to gender rights, they've kind of been criticised for excluding the voices of diverse women, and the intersectionality space is something that I think really does need to be explored. So the hashtag this year and the topic this year is an excellent one. I think we can all agree that women's experiences, they're not homogenous. There are inequalities amplified where there's different factors such as ethnicity or age, sexuality, gender identity, and all these sort of other different factors intersect. If we're only advocating for the experiences of some women, we're going to fail to achieve equality for all women. So the intersectionality part is really, really important. We need to think about what resources we have. We have to tackle the sort of multiple discriminations that are faced by all women. The problem, however, is that very few organisations are going to have access to all of the resources that they need to operate intersectionality. So what I've seen work is that where you collaborate with other organisations and individuals to expand your base of resources, that's really, really helpful. It can be quite overwhelming. There's so much in terms of intersecting identities and experience that need to be taken into consideration. One of the things that I've sort of spoken about before, and I do feel quite strongly about, is part of the problem actually can be, and it is an issue, but it's so well intentioned that we need to talk about it. It can sometimes be the lack of diversity in the committees that are organising International Women's Day events. So, for example, if you've got an International Women's Day event, 9 times out of 10, that's going to probably, and I say that because different organisations will do different things, but 9 times out of 10, that will fall solely to the women's groups and the women's networks. But I think that if you open up the networks that are going to be involved in creating an International Women's Day event, so if you open it up, for example, to your LGBTQ plus group, or you open it up to your ethnic diversity group or your socioeconomic group, then you have a sort of dedicated subcommittee of International Women's Day, and just, you know, kind of by a click of the fingers, you have automatically increased the number of voices that need to be at the table to represent all of these different women. So I think that that's a really important way of, and quite an easy way, I would say, of getting a different perspective, dealing with intersectionality. I think also once you've got these individuals around the table, it's really important to listen to them. We talk a lot about diversity, which is absolutely fantastic. But I also have a bit of an issue when it's brilliant. Yeah, you've got a really diverse workforce, but are you actually listening to them? Are you including them? Do they feel that they belong? So the active listening is really taking the time to listen to someone and understand their experiences, their perspectives, without any judgment. And we need to sort of create those environments. So in terms of bringing lots of women together, I think that's something that I've seen that has worked before, and I think could be a wee bit more encouraged.
And I'm not allowed follow-up questions, but I'm going to ask one anyway, Rupa, which is, you talked about that being a technique for bringing women together, and I assume men too? Absolutely.
So if you've got these different networks, you absolutely should be bringing men to the table. And we can't, it's not women's responsibility to do all of this. We need the men on board. So when I'm talking about getting people together, of course, it means men as well within all those groups. I didn't particularly mention a men's group because, as far as I'm aware, and there may well be men's groups out there, but the subgroups, if there's a men's group, then absolutely get them involved as well.
Thanks, Rupa. I'm going to turn to Katherine, because Katherine, your perspective is possibly one that most people won't have thought about before. Susan's talked about using money, using investment to tackle inequality, and Rupa's talked about some practical strategies within organisations, not solely, but within organisations. I don't know that most people would think about the Edinburgh International Festival as a bastion of inclusion and the promotion of inclusion, and it's quite a different perspective. So can you say a little bit about what the festival's agenda is on inclusion and how you're pursuing that?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for the question. It might help to actually set the scene a little bit about who the International Festival is and why we exist. So just to start off, we are the original festival. We started it all. We're the festival that established Edinburgh as the world's festival city. And since our founding in 1947, we've been incredibly proud to see all the sister festivals who have grown up around us and who have made Edinburgh what it is every August. So what defines us and what sets us apart in that ecosystem of festivals is our curated program. So we're bringing the world's greatest artists across dance and theater and music and opera to Edinburgh. And since 2023, since last year's festival, we've had Nicola Benedetti, this Scottish violin virtuoso, advocate for the performing arts, just all around incredible leader, as our festival director leading the festival. So we can think about how the festival approaches inclusion in a lot of different ways, but when I think about our vision, is to create the deepest possible experience for the broadest possible audience to the highest quality of art. And so that lives in tension with one another. How do we do that all at the same time? And so I think we have to go back to the founding a little bit, that the intention of the International Festival was transcend political boundaries through a global celebration of the performing arts. So we bring people and different cultures and different viewpoints together through performance experiences, but also through the moments of participation in between those and outside of those formal performances. We have talks and discussions that break down the barriers between artists and audiences, and we bring stories and experiences from all parts of the world together for audiences to experience. So last year, for example, we had 2,500 artists of 50 different nationalities who were sharing their artistry in their own unique ways on our stages. And we intentionally work in partnership with artists and companies who share our values to create a lasting change across the industry. So to help us really fulfill our commitment to presenting a program of the widest possible range of artistic voices in ways that are accessible and meaningful for everyone. So, we do have to work on broadening our audience to make sure that everyone can experience that. And I'm sorry, I can't reveal details of the program. That's tomorrow at noon. If you want, I can't reveal secrets right now. So you'll have to tune in tomorrow for all the details. But for us, it really comes down to breaking down those barriers to participation, whether they're real or perceived. So it's giving the warmest welcome possible. It's looking at the formats in which we present our performances, how long they are, the time of day, physically how you are seated. Last year we had beanbag performances, and little spoiler, the beanbags are coming back. It was a really, really popular way to open up a classical music experience. But of course there's the affordability, so reducing the financial barrier to experiencing the festival. And I can say, without going into too much detail, this year the festival is rolling out the most generous concessions policy that we've ever offered, and it's rivaled by very few in the sector in the UK. And we're doing that intentionally to make available a range of affordable tickets and free tickets to the people who need it most. And that's how we're helping to bring inclusion into something like the International Festival.
That was very nearly, Katherine, a chancellor-like leak of what's coming tomorrow in your budget. So I feel we've got something out of that. We've got a lot out of it, but we've got something a wee bit secret out of it. Thank you for that. Back to you, Susan, and back to inspiring inclusion. I know that you're involved in work with the charity supporting women. Again, can you say a little bit about that and how it plays to this year's theme?
Happy to do that, thank you. And yeah, I've just very recently started to get involved in the work of the Simon community, who are a homelessness charity, but specifically I've been getting involved with a new service that they're looking to create in Glasgow, which is a new access hub, the Connect Hub, for women who are experiencing homelessness or risk of homelessness. And just to say that's something in my personal capacity, not as the bank.
Of course.
And that this new service I think is really about inclusion. So it's going to be a space where women can come to access services, whether that might be health or kind of links into education, but also just a space where they can come in and have a meal, have a coffee, meet people, feel included, feel welcome, feel that it's a place that they can make connections, and if they've got young children with them, be able to, you know, be a safe space to bring their children as well. As I say, I've just recently become involved because the work is still ongoing in the premises. We're looking to launch the service kind of late April, early May. But I've been so impressed with the team at the Simon community. Like, the level of passion and commitment to what they do is just fantastic. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about the project is that they've got a steering group of women who've got lived experience of homelessness who've actually been designing the service. So designing the service, really understanding, you know, what it is that's needed and what it is that will make people feel included, and bringing that, again, that gender lens and that understanding that people have different perspectives and experiences and how they want to receive services. You know, there's such a diverse way that people want to experience services and be included. So it's been really, really fascinating. Looking to launch this around kind of late April, early May. There's funding in place to open 4 days a week, which is wonderful. But I'm going to be working with a group of women as a development board to explore how we can get funding in place to open for more days a week, because the need's there. The need is huge. But obviously funding to have additional hours or safe transportation for people to and from the premises, these types of things are really important. So, and I guess it's a group of us who are women who are included, who have platforms like this today and opportunities and networks, and it's about how we can use those networks to try and help promote this service. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, and I'll be following up on LinkedIn once we're kind of ready to launch the service and more to say about it.
Yeah, and it's the key point, isn't it, that those with a platform have got an obligation to do something with it. And I'm going to come back to Rupa, who had also talked about that hearing of all voices and women from all different perspectives, voices. Before I do, Rupa, just want to remind our audience that the Q&A function exists and that there will come an opportunity for you to use it. So if you have any questions that you are thinking of or would like to pose, stick them in the Q&A just as soon as, and I will come to them. Rupa, you mentioned that you are a member of the Law Society's Equality and Diversity Committee. You're not quite an ex-lawyer. You haven't quite escaped the legal profession.
Certificate.
Do you want to say a little bit about what the Law Society is doing to make the profession more inclusive?
Sure. So for those who might not be aware, the Equality and Diversity Committee basically exists to sort of set, inform and guide the policy and the actions of the Law Society of Scotland in relation to issues of equity, diversity and inclusion. It offers guidance and support to the Society. It's made up of a very kind of diverse range of members within the actual committee itself, which is very important because that's where we get all the best ideas from. We are sometimes asked to offer guidance on specific issues to the council and the committees of the Society, and identify key priorities in areas where we think that the Society needs to concentrate on, particularly listening to its members. And, you know, for all the lawyers on this call, you know, you are a member of the Law Society of Scotland. I would absolutely encourage you to be involved. You will have seen more recently that there's lots of sessions that are offered, lots of CPD. You know, it's made as easy as possible for people. You can get your CPD through coming and learning about neurodiversity or what it means to, you know, to deal with someone who has various protective characteristics. So I would absolutely encourage people to take those opportunities up. But one of the main things that the Society has been working on for a number of years now is the profile of the profession, which is the major census for those who are working in the Scottish legal sector, and hopefully those on the call who had the opportunity to do so did participate in that, because it's conducted every 5 years. It examines equity, diversity, inclusion issues across the profession. It allows us to get a really unique, in-depth view of the makeup of the profession and the issues and the experiences which our members are going through. And the results of the research, which is done via the profile of the profession, that actually directly then informs the policy work that the Law Society does and how we support members. And the most recent one was done last year in 2023. It's done every 5 years. And last year, for the very first time, the profile of the profession actually included questions on members' wellbeing and mental health, which was a really important thing which hadn't necessarily been picked up in previous census. And the results there really showed that mental health issues are prevalent across the legal profession. And the wellbeing issues are very, very important. We're still working through all the data, and if anyone's interested, you can actually go and have a look at the report. It is widely available on the Law Society's website. Some really good progress in some areas: retention, earnings, levels of discrimination, but there's still a lot of work to do. What the Society has done since then, so the results are out. It's a very long document. I think it's over 180 pages or something, but there's a summary, so you can obviously read that. But what the Society decided to do was, taking into account the kind of most prevalent issues that arose as a result of that, roundtables have just recently been conducted with members of the profession. So there's been a number of roundtables following up on what was contained in the census and the research outcomes, and further work is ongoing. So these roundtables really put to the members who were involved: here's what the census says, what do you think we should do, how does it impact you, what else can we do? Really speaking to people, so sort of coming back to what I was saying earlier about speaking to as many people as we possibly can and listening to them. I think it is really important that we as a profession look at the report very, very carefully. It compares it to the 2018 results as well, which I think is very, very interesting. But, you know, to cut a very, very long story short, the main issues that arise as a result of this is that it's structural within the legal profession. It's structural issues within the legal profession, of course, in respect of gender, but also other issues and cultural issues within the profession. So what the committee is hoping to do is to continue to engage in depth with members, really discuss how we can make things better. But the issue, and I think I can say this quite openly, is the slight issue we have is that those who are willing to engage, it's the same people again and again, and we really need a more diverse group of people to be able to come to us, because if we're speaking to the same people again and again, we're getting the same ideas again and again, and we need those who maybe haven't stepped up before, for whatever reason that may be, to really kind of come with us on this journey. I'm always happy to chat to anyone if they want to chat a wee bit more about what that means. I'm happy for people to reach out to me on LinkedIn or in another way. But I think that we really do need to address the kind of structural issues, and the Equality and Diversity Committee is very passionate about doing that going forward.
Thanks, and I had been about to ask you exactly that question. How do people practically find out how to get involved and add their voice? But you have offered yourself up as a conduit, so hopefully people will take that up in terms of that offer. Katherine, back to you. You've said quite a lot about the festival's overarching approach to inclusion and widening your audience. A question not about the audience, but about artists and about those who perform at the festival. And again, just interested in what the festival does to broaden the range of those who perform and have access to a stage at the festival.
Absolutely. And I know I mentioned it briefly, but it really does go all the way back to the beginning, that the founding of the festival was in 1947. It was post-World War II. It was truly meant as a way to bring artists and people together at a moment where the world really needed reconciliation, that transcended real geographical boundaries, political boundaries, ideological boundaries, for everyone to come together in this global celebration. And artists from all around the world came to participate. So the fact that we program artists and bring companies and stories and artistry from all around the world, there's a bit of built-in internationalism and diversity of storytelling within that. But we look at it in a few different ways. You know, we look at program diversity, both in terms of representation on stage, but also the artistic narratives that are told. So, you know, by growing more diverse, the festival program is enriched in that way. It's the artists get to experience that, the audiences get to experience that, the wraparound activities we put around it deepen the conversation. So it's not just walking into a theater, sitting down, curtain goes up, you see a show, curtain goes down, you leave. We're trying to add more moments where the artists and the audiences can really connect on a person-to-person basis, because we know that's where the real change can happen, where conversations can happen, where you can challenge a viewpoint. But also, we like to think about it in terms of representation on stage. Can our audience members, if we are having the broadest possible audience, can they see themselves on stage? Can that young girl sitting in the audience see a female conductor on the podium? Can someone with a lived experience that maybe they haven't shared with their friends, or maybe they feel isn't of the majority, can they see that lived experience told on stage in a way that they go, wow, you know, I feel like someone sees who I am and what I've gone through in my life. So that's how we approach building the program together. It's through every single art form. So when we talk about music, we really mean music. It's not just a traditional Western European definition of classical music. Of course, we do have classical music. We have opera, we have ballet and dance and opera and theater, but we have the diversity of the storytelling within that. And you can look at all of our core venues and the core of our program. It's all in there together. It's all given an equal platform for our audiences to experience it. And, you know, this year, and again, I'm not spoiling it, we have shared this, but our theme this year is rituals that unite us. What better way to bring people together, to open up the conversation, to really inspire inclusion in this festival spirit than opening it up and saying, we want to talk about it, and we want you to experience it, and we want to create the best, most welcoming and supportive and empathetic environment for everyone to have the experience that they need, because there's no single way to experience a concert or a play or an opera or a piece of theater. You can have your own experience. You can share that with the artist. You can share that with your fellow audience members. It might be different, and that's perfectly fine, but that's how we want everyone to feel, that this is a place where they can have that shared experience together.
Thank you, Catherine. I say to our audience, if there is not material in what you've heard for the last half hour to provoke questions, then you have not been paying attention. So if you have questions, let me have them now. Now, what I have in reserve are 2 quick fire questions for the whole panel, but I'm going to keep them in reserve just for the moment. And I'm going to look for questions from our audience to put to all or one or more of you. I have a question actually, Susan, for you, and it's around what you've said about place, and it's a question from a participant who's working in Aberdeenshire around the concept and an issue of place. And the question is about what you and what the bank is doing on health inequalities and how that's contributing to the general place agenda. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. Yeah, and I've read the question in the chat, so thank you for that. Yeah, I think in terms of our role as a commercial investor, it's more about understanding, you know, where the investment rationale and thesis might be that would lead to better health outcomes, as opposed to us investing in health services, obviously, per se. But I think that link between health and housing that I talked about earlier, that link between health and quality of neighbourhoods, that's where we would see the kind of emphasis of the place mission. And certainly housing as a basic fundamental premise of, you know, your quality of life and your health. You know, that's certainly something that we're looking at. And if anyone after today wants to have a follow-up conversation with me on any of this, as I said at the start, it's very much about collaboration. So we as a commercial investor can only play, you know, one part of developing overall solutions. So it's about how we can collaborate with other parts of the public sector, with the private sector, and with third sector to actually, you know, try and co-create solutions, working together with us, bringing that commercial investment lens, but very much listening to others and what they think would work and would help to tackle some of these big societal challenges that we're talking about.
Thanks, Susan. Catherine, your contribution on artists has provoked a response, and the question that has come in is just around whether you have a quota system to ensure the diversity of artists. And I'm going to add a question of my own on the same theme, because while you were talking about the diversity of the platform, I was thinking about the diversity of the people who choose the diversity of the platform. So do you want to say a little bit about just how you operationalize all of that?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to. So we work in partnership with artists and companies who ultimately share our values. And it does come down to shared values. And many of the artist and company relationships we have, it's not a single year relationship. So it really is a long-term dialogue and process. And just because we're speaking with a particular artist right now, it might be in 3 or 4 years' time that we see their work or we see them on stage in the festival program. So in that way, the programming of a festival is naturally organic and has an ebb and flow and change over time to it. And any number of factors could disrupt something, whether it's availability or pieces of work simply not being ready to come to the stage yet. So we do continuously challenge ourselves and the decisions we make, both internally and with the artists who we're working with. Understanding that the curatorial process is by nature subjective. It simply is. There's not a quota system that we operate under, but we do assess the program at certain intervals during the planning process, reviewing our processes, reviewing the program choices, and really taking a critical look at that, not just within the programming team, but across the many parts of the organization. And also after the festival season, really taking particular care that the voices telling each artistic story, the stories that are being told, that they're appropriate, that they're relevant. We want to make sure that we are a festival of the present day, that we are speaking to the world right now. So whilst there isn't a particular quota, there is an ongoing dialogue at every single point in the year in the development of the program to ensure that, to the best of our ability, that there is a broad range of both internationalism, but also perspectives being shared.
Thank you very much. And to complete the triumvirate question, Rupa, now this is tricky because this is a question about the Law Society's position on a topic, and I appreciate you do not speak entirely for the Law Society, but a question has come in about social mobility, and it's a question I've got quite a lot of sympathy with, and it describes the increase in fees that we've seen over many years in relation to the diploma in legal practice, and of course the consequent reduction in availability of funding to meet those fees. And the questioner quite rightly notes that it would have been a deterrent to her, it would have been a deterrent to me to have to pay for the diploma. Part of the question is about whether law firms are doing anything to tackle that, and I can say that Brodies does help its trainee recruits with diploma fees, but that's not something that is available to every law firm. So it's a question about what, if anything, the Law Society is doing to address that issue, to lobby for change, to address it more directly. And if you feel you can't answer that question, then don't, but any contribution you have would be really welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Christine, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability, but I will repeat what you said, which is I don't speak for the Law Society, I sit on one committee. Interestingly, that is an issue that has come up within the Equality and Diversity Committee. It doesn't necessarily strictly fall under us, but it is something that does get bandied about quite a lot. From my personal experience of it, being in charge of trainee recruitment for quite some time, it was a consistent issue. And the problem that we have is that there's just no consistency to any of it. Universities charge differently, and actually I didn't realise that until because I trained a very long time ago, and at that stage, if the fees had been what they are now, I wouldn't have been able to enter the legal profession either. So I think that when I found out, first of all, how much the fees were, I was astounded. But not only that, different universities are charging different fees, and from what I've seen, they can range from anything between 7,000 up to about 11,000, which is a lot of money. You're then having to deal with the fact that once you've got your diploma, you have to have your traineeship within a certain amount of time, because if you don't, then the diploma becomes out of date, etc. And the amount of graduates that we've spoken to who are now unable to simply start work in the legal profession when they would like to is becoming more and more limited, because they need to go away and do other jobs to be able to pay back their diploma, etc. So the Law Society it's an issue that does get raised consistently. I know that they are looking at it, but I wouldn't be able to tell you, unfortunately, the progress stage. But I have noted down to make that a personal thing, to go back and just ruffle some feathers about that again. In respect of law firms, as you said, Christine, you know, for example, Brodies does, and I know that a number of law firms do offer funding, or at least they offer loans towards funding, or, you know, a part of it, etc. But equally, there will be firms out there, some of the smaller high street firms will just not be able to contribute towards that, which then has a wider impact on the training of all these graduates who are coming out, and we are trying to get lawyers into every single bit of the legal profession. So it's a really difficult one. It's absolutely vital that it does get addressed. But yeah, a lot more work to be done on that. I'm not entirely sure how it ended up in this position, to be honest. But £10,000 is such a lot of money. There does need to be something done, especially if we're talking about making things equal for people to enter the profession.
Thank you very much, Rupa. Now, anyone who knows me from the firm knows that I care about one thing more than anything else, and that is keeping to time. And that being so, and protective of everybody else's day, I will move to my quick fire questions to you all to be answered. I think Susan, then Rupa, then Katherine. And the first of those quick fire questions is, International Women's Day has been around since 1911. And is recognised and celebrated globally. Can you tell us briefly and punchily why you think it's still important to mark International Women's Day, Susan?
Well, I think because there's still inequality, isn't there? I mean, I'm sure it's not exactly the same issues as there was in 1911, but you know, we're still talking about gender pay gap. We're still talking about the need to recognise that services and other things should be designed with a gender lens, as well as diversity, and looking at other characteristics and thinking about things from an inclusive perspective. From an investment perspective, we're still talking about the fact that there's 1 in 5 small businesses in Scotland that are female-led, and only 2% of institutional capital actually going into those businesses in terms of investment. So there's a lot of things still to be solved for, and I think we shouldn't just be talking about it one day. We should be talking about it all the time. But at least having this day gives us an opportunity to come together in sessions like this.
Thank you, Susan. Rupa.
Susan sort of stole what I was going to say, which was, it's not meant to be one day, it's meant to be an all year round thing. It's a really difficult one. Of course, yes, International Women's Day is very, very important, and it does help to raise visibility on very important issues. And I know this is going to sound weird as I'm sitting on a panel speaking to you about this, but I do think that people are getting a wee bit fed up of sort of the same, and I'm not saying that this particular panel is that, but I think that people are maybe getting a wee bit fed up with events that are attended exclusively by women, or when you're just kind of preaching to the converted already. I don't know what the attendee list for this particular panel session looks like. I'm really hopeful that there's a lot more men on it. I do think it is important to have the day because it does raise awareness, but I am very passionate about it not just being on that one day. And I read an article at one point which said that kind of corporates are trying to use this more, and they're calling it pink wash. So they're sort of pink washing their brands to promote, you know, their brand rather than promote women's equality, which is sort of what it was all meant to be about in the first place. And in particular, I think it was last year or the year before, but there was someone who had a great time on Twitter that any time an organisation posted something about International Women's Day, this person would go away and look at what their gender pay gap was and tweet it out to everybody. So I think if that can be done on International Women's Day, brilliant. Let's keep going with that, and I love it for that. But yeah, we need more action all year round.
Thank you, Rupa. Katherine.
Well, I would say yes to exactly what Susan and what Rupa said. And Rupa, those tweets were so enjoyable last year. It was kind of, oh, have you not learned your lesson now? But for me, it's also, it's to make it unavoidable. We need to keep doing this and keep having this conversation until, not just until everyone's sick of it, but until it's no longer a topic, until it's no longer needed. And I also think of it as a way of women supporting women, that it's claiming our space, it's making our mark, it's celebrating one another and making that okay to uplift one another. I think about you know, I don't know why it was exactly news, but I think about Jamie Lee Curtis celebrating Michelle Yeoh's win at the Golden Globes and how that just went absolutely viral and how incredible that was for particularly young women, I think, to see another woman celebrating another woman succeed. And I think that's for me what is inspiring about it. And yes, it should be all year. Yes, it shouldn't even be necessary, but we can model that for one another and for the next generation.
So Katherine, you've already given your answer to my last quickfire question, which was to ask you to share a moment that you've experienced or someone you've engaged with or seen that has inspired you to be inclusive, that has uplifted you. You've given us one from the global stage. I don't know if you want to give us another closer to home.
Absolutely. I'd love to. And it's actually something that I didn't realize until many years after the fact, but in a prior role at a prior organization where I was really fortunate to have the president of the organization was a woman, my boss was a woman. I was a you know, mid-level leader in the organization as a woman. So this was you know, girl power here. But the president of the organization started taking me out on some meetings and presentations she was giving around the city to all different types of groups. And I was running the PowerPoint presentation, but I was listening to her speak and I was engaging with her in that way. And it wasn't until after the fact that I realized she was giving me the opportunity. She was showing me how to do this. And she wasn't putting the pressure on me. She wasn't forcing me to go speak in public or make me feel uncomfortable, but she was showing me how it's done and she was bringing me along and she was modeling that for me. And she did it in such a human way. And it's something that, again, you know, it wasn't until years later that I went, oh, all that PowerPoint clicking was actually really meaningful on a different level. But it's something that, having learned from it now, it's something I want to do for my team. I want my team to look back on their time with me and think, oh, that's why she did that. Maybe be a little more explicit about it, but you know, that's something that I'll carry with me.
Rupa, give us your moment.
So I mean, I've got many moments, but if I was to pick one, I suppose just from a work context, when I sort of started in the Director of People and Development role, you know, and I was very excited about getting in and doing lots of things and changing things, and I was writing policies and, you know, just all these events, etc. And I remember being just in our kind of cafe bit and speaking to one of the apprentices who I had hired, and he was 16, and just chatting away to him and how's it going, etc. And then he just said, Rupa, you know, some of that stuff that you send around, I have no clue what you're on about. And I was just, oh, great. I was like, tell me more. But just having that realization that actually where I was so determined to be inclusive of all these different protected characteristics and making sure that that actually just the way that I had written it meant that some people just hadn't quite grasped what I was saying. So this young apprentice, basically, I think was telling me, you've just discriminated against me on the basis of my age. That really stuck with me, because from then I never ever made that mistake again. I always made sure to then sort of kind of cross check with you know, and I had the group of apprentices there, like, come here, does this make sense to you? Is this in a language that you're going to understand? What can I do to make it more accessible? And I think that was a really important lesson for me, just to always be very, very aware that when you're trying to do these things and you're trying to push out initiatives or events or whatever it is, that you really do have a very big responsibility to choose your language very carefully, to choose the way that you are promoting things very carefully, and you have got an absolute obligation to be inclusive of everybody. And in that particular one, I didn't think I'd done very well from an age point of view. I hadn't grasped you know, what this kind of younger generation was all about, which, to be honest, my kids tell me that all the time anyway, that I'm ancient. But it does make me think twice now when I'm doing things. Just a little sense check with the kids is always a good thing.
Empathy with ancientness, Rupa, empathy from me. Susan, last moment.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things the bank's been involved with recently, and I would real privilege of being involved with is the Pathways Forward initiative that's been led by Anna Stewart. It's looking at barriers to female entrepreneurship and access to finance around that. And the bank actually has been one of the first kind of pledgers looking at what action we can take. And that whole piece of work has been really inspiring. I would say one of the pivotal things for me is even in the Pathways Forward report, where Anna and our co-author Mark Logan as well, they call out in the report in the first page about there being, you know, sexism in our society and the fact that we need to actually recognise that. So looking at that wider systemic picture. And I know that could sound quite kind of demoralising, you know, particularly in the context of International Women's Day, but actually, you know, for me, I thought that's really brave to call that out, and actually quite motivational in terms of recognising the scale of the challenge and saying this is about society. Like Rupa made a comment earlier as well, this isn't just women's responsibility, this is a whole society problem that we need to work together to fix. And also through that work, the real focus on action again. The idea that this is about organisations all taking steps, all committing to actions, and that collective action can kind of add up to greater than the sum of its parts, which I think is, again, building that momentum and that sense of purpose. So I found that, you know, really, really inspiring.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to all of our panelists. And I'm going to ask you to pause and stay with us for just the last couple of minutes of this session, because I want to add a further voice to our webinar, and that is Sarah Keir, who is the chair of Brodies Women's Network and also a trainee solicitor with the firm. And Sarah's going to say a few words about the Women's Network and what we've got on at the moment. Sarah, over to you. And if I may say, again, punctually, if you don't mind.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. As chair of the Women's Network at Brodies, I am honoured to extend my sincere appreciation for being able to collaborate with Brodies for today's panel discussion in celebration of International Women's Day. International Women's Day marks an important opportunity for us to reflect on the progress we've made and the actions that lie ahead in promoting gender equality. The insights shared by our panelists have been invaluable, shedding light on diverse experiences and perspectives on what progress can mean and look like in action. Here at Brodies, you know, we're looking at continuing to work with charities and to also look internally of reading books and book clubs in celebrating International Women's Day this month of March. I want to express my deepest gratitude to each panelist for their time, expertise, and thoughtful contributions. You've really enriched our discussions and inspire us to continue striving for inclusivity and diversity in workplaces and beyond. And I extend my thanks to all members of Brodies who have dedicated time and effort to make this event possible. And lastly, thank you to all of you for watching and participating in this session. I just want to express my gratitude on behalf of the Women's Network as Brodies marks this International Women's Day for 2024 and as we close this session shortly.
Thank you, Sarah. That was as punchy as it needed to be. Thank you very much to you. I echo all of the thanks that you have made to others. But for now, thank you very much for coming along to today's event. Thank you again to our panelists. Have an excellent day. Thank you.